Jake Harper bought the lake cabin for one reason: silence. The kind of silence that didn't come with sirens, horns, or neighbors knocking about petty complaints. Just the still water, a couple loons, and fireflies. That dream lasted exactly for weekends right until Karen Middleton found his extension outlet. Karen wasn't just any neighbor. She was the self-appointed ruler of Timber Hollow, a lakeside HOA that was smaller than it was strict. Karen ran it like a kingdom, clipboard always in hand, her golf cart a chariot of suburban control. She quoted bylaws as if they were gospel, even if no one else had ever seen the pages she waved around. The first time Jake noticed her meddling, it was subtle. A sticky note appeared on his door. Cabin color violates Section 9A. It didn't. Then came the measuring tape. She was checking the height of his bird feeder. But the line was officially crossed the day he returned from fishing to find her cart parked beside his cabin and plugged into his outdoor outlet like it belonged. There. Jake stood there for a full minute, just staring. The boldness of it. Her cart, dusty with pine needles, buzzing gently as it drained his cabin's solar power. She wasn't even nearby. She'd just helped herself. He unplugged it, coiled the cord, and left it neatly by her tires. No note. Number confrontation, just boundaries. But the next weekend, it happened again. And this time, Karen had added a fresh sticky note on his door. Shared power is neighborly. Refusal may be fined. That's when Jake knew this wasn't ignorance. It was strategy. And it wasn't going to stop unless he made it stop. He didn't storm over. He didn't argue. He went quiet. The kind of quiet that meant something was brewing. Jake started reviewing his property maps, especially the electrical layout. He called his cousin Rick, a retired lineman with a thing for quiet revenge stories. Rick laughed when he heard the situation. "You want legal or effective?" Rick had asked. "Both," Jake replied, staring out at the lake. Over the next few days, Jake prepared his plan. He took photos, not of Karen, of the extension cord, the outlet, the dates. He started reviewing his cabin's power draw and saw spikes every time she came around. He started leaving voice memos on his phone, noting times, weather, and even whether her dog had barked. He wasn't being paranoid. He was documenting. Meanwhile, Karen began escalating in her own way. She stopped waving. She drove slower past his place. She began leaving community notices rolled into his porch rail like tiny scrolls of royal decree. One accused him of disrupting the HOA harmony. Another simply read, "Selfishness breeds problems." Jake read every one and said nothing. But the real tipping point came the following Friday night. Jake had arrived late, exhausted, ready to sleep. When he stepped onto his porch, the lights inside flickered. Confused, he stepped around the corner and froze. Karen's golf cart? Plugged in, again? Except this time the cabin's main breaker had tripped. His fridge had shut off. The meat he brought up for the weekend, already thawing. The power draw from her cart had overloaded his backup system. She hadn't just stolen a few volts, she'd wrecked his weekend. Jake didn't say a word. He unplugged. The cord, he gently picked it up, walked it to the edge of the property, and tossed it onto the common path. He didn't bother knocking. Karen had crossed a line, and she had no idea what Jake was about to set in motion. What she didn't know was that Jake had already started digging, not just through HOA policies, but through something much stronger than fine print. A fence. One that didn't block views, one that didn't need permits, but one that would make sure Karen never plugged in again without a consequence. She'd feel every single time, and if you're thinking Jake's just being dramatic, wait until you see what happens the night she tries it again. The next morning, Jake stepped out onto his porch with a mug of coffee in hand. The air was cool, the lake like glass, but his jaw tightened when he spotted Karen's golf cart parked beside her garage. Orange cord, neatly coiled in the passenger seat, as if it had returned from battle and was resting before the next strike. Jake had expected her to come knocking. Instead, she sent another letter. This one wasn't a sticky note, it was typed, sealed, and hand-delivered into his mailbox. The envelope was even embossed with the Timber Hollow HOA emblem, something she had custom-made years ago. According to a neighbor. Jake opened it and read the letter twice. It was equal parts comedy and lunacy. Karen was claiming that shared outlet usage was a community right under Section 13B of the HOA guidelines. Something about power equity during resource scarcity. She underlined phrases like neighbor cooperation and collective harmony, twisting vague language into her own weapon. Jake knew there was no such rule in any real HOA document. But Karen was the kind of person who didn't rely on rules, she relied on confidence. Say it with enough conviction, and half the neighborhood would nod along. The other half wouldn't bother fighting back. But Jake wasn't the other half. He drove into town that afternoon and stopped by the county office. After 3 cups of burnt waiting room coffee and one very confused clerk, he walked out with a certified map, a property boundary affidavit, and a copy of the original HOA charter. For Timber Hollow, none of them mentioned shared power. None. Back at the cabin, Jake started preparing. He cleaned the outlet, installed a weatherproof camera above it, placed a small laminated sign, private power source. Unauthorized use will be reported. Then he called Rick again. You ready to teach someone a gentle lesson? Jake asked. Let me grab my tool belt, Rick replied without missing a beat. The following weekend, the 2 men worked quietly. They used natural cover shrubs, boulders, even a low fence rail that Karen once complained was aesthetically jarring. What they installed was legal, a low-voltage, solar-powered perimeter wire designed to keep raccoons out of the trash. It wouldn't harm anyone, but it would send a message, literally. Jake added signs at every 10-foot interval. Nothing flashy, just enough to say, this is mine, and you are not welcome to take it. But Jake wasn't done. That night, he uploaded his footage of Karen's cart drawing power to a private online archive, not public yet. He logged the times and dates in a spreadsheet. If she escalated, he'd be ready, not with fists, with facts. The next morning, Jake attended the monthly HOA meeting, not something he usually did. When he walked into the clubhouse, Karen's eyes narrowed. She was already mid-sentence, explaining to the board how certain residents weren't cooperating with energy-sharing etiquette. Jake sat at the back, arms crossed, saying nothing. He waited until the floor opened for comments, then he stood. I'd just like clarification, Jake said calmly. On where? Exactly. In the Timber Hollow bylaws, it says homeowners are allowed to use someone else's private power source without permission. Karen opened her mouth. Nothing came out. He continued. Because I've reviewed the charter, the county map, the property lines, and there's nothing in any of those documents about what you're claiming. So if you'd like to show me where this Section 13B lives, I'll gladly listen. The room went silent. One board member coughed. Another glanced at Karen. She shuffled her papers, lips pressed tight. It's implied. A shared spirit of cooperation. Implied isn't policy, Jake said, still calm. And just so we're all clear, my cabin's system is now protected. I've filed a formal report of unauthorized usage, and I've documented every instance with time-stamped footage. Karen turned red, muttered something about aggressive behavior, and ended the meeting early. Jake left without another word. He hadn't come to argue, he came to put her on notice. And if she thought that was the end of it, she was wrong. Because Jake wasn't just defending his property, he was exposing her pattern, and the next move she made would spark something. She couldn't unplug from 2 days after the HOA meeting, Jake noticed something strange, whispers, not from Karen, but from the neighbors. It started with a man walking his dog across the gravel loop. He gave Jake a nod, then a low quiet, saw the video. That was all, no explanation, just a knowing smirk and a tug on the leash. Jake hadn't shared anything publicly yet, but somehow, it was spreading. Rick had warned him. You don't need to post it, you just need to let one nosy neighbor see it. By accident, and Jake had done just that. When Cindy, who ran the weekend bake sales, came over to drop off some fresh peach pie, Jake had accidentally left the laptop open with the security footage, paused right at the moment Karen plugged into his cabin outlet without permission. Cindy's gasp had said it all. Now, people were talking. Karen, who used to strut around with her clipboard like it was a royal scepter, started getting fewer waves. Her morning walks looked less triumphant and more tense. But instead of backing down, she doubled down just like Jake expected. She went quiet. No more notes, no more warnings. Just her glaring from behind tinted sunglasses, her posture stiff. Calculating. Jake stayed ready. He checked his cameras, twice a day. The outlet camera was working perfectly. The new security light flicked on at the slightest motion. He even added a low chime that rang in the cabin if someone crossed the property line. 3 days passed, then 4. And then. On Friday night, Jake saw something on the footage that stopped him mid-bite during dinner. It was Karen. She hadn't driven the golf cart. She'd parked 2 lots down and walked in through the woods behind his place, ducking low between the trees like she was on a mission. Her movements were awkward, fast, like someone trying to outrun their own guilt. She carried the extension cord like it was a secret. No clipboard this time, just a hoodie pulled over her perfect blonde bob, like she was starring in a bad disguise from a daytime drama. Jake didn't interrupt her. He didn't turn on the lights or step outside. He just watched from inside. Silent, recording. She reached the outlet, looked both ways, then crouched, plugged in the cord, and gave a satisfied little nod. She started tiptoeing away until her wrist jerked suddenly. Jake blinked, Karen froze. The cord was stuck snagged on the edge of the outdoor camera mount. She yanked. It didn't give. She stepped back to free it, her sandal clipping the edge of a small wire, barely visible in the dark. Then came the pop. A short, sharp spark lit the air like a firecracker. Karen shrieked, stumbling backward. Her hood flew down, hair frizzed from the jolt. She hit the ground with a thud and lay there blinking, stunned. Not hurt, but embarrassed. The fence had done exactly what it was designed for. A calibrated non-lethal jolt to stop entitled trespassers from poking where they didn't belong. Jake stepped out onto his porch, arms crossed. He said nothing. Karen scrambled to her feet, dragging the cord behind her like a guilty snake. She didn't speak, didn't demand anything. She just turned and limped back into the woods, muttering to herself, mascara smeared under one eye. Didn't chase her, he didn't laugh. He went back inside, locked the door, and archived the footage. By morning, the neighborhood was humming. The story had grown legs. Neighbors who barely made eye contact before now stopped their walks to ask, "Is it true?" Some brought coffee, some brought beer, one even brought popcorn. Everyone wanted to know what would happen next. Jake didn't say much. He let the footage speak for itself. Quiet power, he'd learned, was better than yelling. Karen, meanwhile, was unraveling. She sent no apology, no excuse. But she did go to the HOA board and accuse Jake of building a dangerous perimeter trap. She demanded an investigation. What she didn't know was that Jake had already submitted every form, every diagram, and every camera recording to the local sheriff, who also happened to be Rick's cousin, and the sheriff. He'd just scheduled a visit to Karen's house, because as Jake soon discovered, the outlet wasn't the only way Karen had been stealing power. There was something beneath the surface, literally, that Karen hadn't expected him to find, and when he did, it would flip everything upside down. The morning after Karen's nighttime zap, Jake didn't smile, he didn't gloat. He simply rewatched the footage once more, noted the timestamp, and added it to the folder labeled unauthorized access. Evidence. His goal wasn't revenge, it was protection. And now that the HOA president had been shocked trying to steal power, he knew she'd escalate. People like Karen always did. Rick pulled into Jake's gravel driveway a few hours later, hauling his truck bed full of tools. So, she got fried. Jake nodded, mildly, like a mosquito flying into a bug zapper with a clipboard. The two men got to work. They'd already installed the outer line of the electric perimeter, but after Karen's sneaky late-night forest detour, Jake knew he had to reinforce the backyard section, the one obscured by dense trees and thick brush. That was her blind spot and her favorite path for trespassing, Rick suggested. They run a deeper scan of the property before digging in the new posts. He had a handheld signal reader normally used to trace old lines and water pipes. It wasn't fancy, but it beeped if something didn't belong under the soil. Jake agreed. Better safe than sorry. They scanned the edge of the woods, then closer to the cabin. Halfway around the west side of the house, the reader chirped loud, urgent. Not once, not twice. It screamed like a smoke alarm near the back corner of the property. Jake raised a brow. What's that? Rick narrowed his eyes and scanned again. That's not a sprinkler line, that's a conduit. Electrical, deep. You didn't run anything back here, did you? Not a thing. They traced the line. It ran from the back of Jake's cabin, beneath the shrubs, out past the tree line toward the adjoining lot, Karen's lot. They followed it until the signal weakened near the edge of her property. Rick exhaled slowly. Jake, I think she tapped your grid. Jake didn't say a word. He turned back to the cabin, heart now beating with slow, boiling clarity. That would explain the strange power fluctuations. The drawdown on cloudy days? It wasn't just her cart. She'd been pulling juice from his cabin to supply her home. Through an underground, unauthorized connection. He didn't storm over, he didn't shout. He pulled out his phone, took a photo of the reader, and then another of the exposed line where they'd scraped the surface. This is theft, Rick said. Not just petty. We're talking felony level. If she cut into your service box or junction ... She did it when I wasn't here, Jake muttered. Probably hired someone under the table. By evening, Jake had emailed the photos, footage, and property survey to the utility company, the sheriff's office, and just for fun his own attorney, who owed him a favor from their college years. Karen, meanwhile, was nowhere to be seen. Her house looked quiet. The blinds were drawn. The golf cart was parked out front, looking innocent again. But Jake knew better now. Behind those closed windows was a tangled web of entitlement and electric theft. Still, He didn't take down the fence, he improved it, added warning reflectors, ran a decoy wire just in case Karen came snooping with gloves next time. He even mounted a second camera hidden in a birdhouse, angled right at the tree line she used for her secret visits. That night, Jake sat on his porch, a cold drink in hand, feet up. The lake shimmered under a silver moon, and while the peace hadn't returned completely, a new feeling had settled in. Control. The next day he got a call from the utility company. The voice was firm, interested. "We received your photos. That line shouldn't be there. We'll be dispatching an inspection crew to verify the junction." An hour later, the sheriff's office followed up. They wanted to see the footage in person. Things were finally moving. Jake didn't know what Karen's endgame had been. Maybe she thought no one would notice a few kilowatts missing. Maybe she thought no one would fight her. But now, the story wasn't just between two neighbors. It was official. And Karen had no idea that her kingdom of silent theft was about to come crashing down. It didn't take long for Karen to realize things were turning against her, not just because her name had become a whisper on every neighbor's lips, but because no one was afraid of her anymore. She noticed at first at the HOA meeting. When she tapped her clipboard and cleared her throat, nobody hushed. When she cited bylaws, nobody nodded. And when she tried to bring up dangerous contraptions near Jake Harper's cabin, someone in the back chuckled. Karen pretended not to notice, but she noticed. She tried to shift focus, talking about community safety, then unauthorized electrical devices, and even floated the idea of an emergency vote to ban perimeter fences. Jake sat in the corner, arms folded, saying nothing. He didn't need to. The board wasn't listening to her anymore. And then, 3 words from board member Gail Matson sealed it. "I saw the footage." Karen's face went pale. She pressed her lips together and ended the meeting 10 minutes early. Later that evening, Jake sat by the fire pit in his backyard, watching the orange glow reflect off the lake's still surface. He hadn't seen Karen all day, but he knew better than to assume quiet meant peace. She was regrouping. Someone like her didn't lose control without making one last desperate play. And sure enough, just after midnight, the motion chime went off. Jake checked the monitor. There she was. Karen had returned. Only this time, she wasn't in her usual prim blouse and heels. She wore all black, hoodie zipped up, gloves on. She looked like she was trying to star in her own late-night heist movie, only the villain didn't. No, the cameras were rolling. She crept along the tree line, ducked under the warning signs, and paused near the same spot where she'd been shocked days earlier. Jake leaned in. She scanned the fence wire, held up a flashlight, and followed the line back to the source. Her glove hand reached into her jacket and pulled out wire cutters. Jake's eyebrows lifted. She was going to disable it. She clipped the decoy wire first, the one Rick had rigged just in case. It sparked lightly, harmless. Karen flinched, looked around, then smirked as if she'd outsmarted the system. She didn't realize the real wire ran deeper, behind a second rail, and she was still standing inside the active perimeter. She reached for the outdoor outlet egg, and Jake had reinstalled a fake one just for this moment. The second she made contact, the calibrated pulse surged. A bright crack echoed through the trees. Karen screamed. It wasn't a long scream, it was short, sharp, and followed by a thud as she stumbled backward into the brush, one sneaker flying off into the ferns. Jake didn't move. He watched from inside, recording everything. Karen lay there stunned, blinking, into the night, hair standing in wild static like she'd just licked a storm. She didn't cry out again. She just rolled over, got to her knees, and limped back toward the wood chulus, humiliated and silent. Jake stepped onto the porch, flashlight in hand. He didn't yell. He simply called out into the dark. "Next time, bring a surge protector." Response: only rustling leaves fading into the distance. By morning, the story had already made its rounds. The neighbor across the road said he heard a zap, followed by a cartoon scream. Another found Karen's sneaker and left it on a stump at the edge of her yard like a trophy. Still, Karen didn't speak, but she acted at noon. She filed a complaint with the sheriff's office, accusing Jake of creating a militarized electrical weapon designed to harm community members. She claimed trauma, threatened civil action, and even called the local news. But she didn't know what Jake had already handed over. Sheriff Donnelly arrived later that day, not to arrest Jake, but to inform him that Karen was under investigation for unauthorized electrical tapping, trespassing, and false reporting. The footage, the buried cable, the recorded meetings, it was all admissible. Her house might be next on the inspection list, the sheriff said with a smirk. Karen had tried to flip the narrative, but the current was already against her, and there was no unplugging what came next. Karen always believed she could talk her way out of anything. She had that rehearsed tone, the one that sounded both offended and righteous at the same time. The same tone that got HOA members to nod without question, and neighbors to apologize for things they hadn't done. So when she marched into the sheriff's office claiming Jake had electrocuted her with a booby-trapped cabin, she expected swift results, apologies, handcuffs, maybe even a restraining order against him. What she didn't expect was a raised eyebrow and silence, as Sheriff Donnelly slid a USB stick into his laptop and started playing security footage. Her face dropped when she saw herself creeping along Jake's fence line in the dead of night, black hoodie, zipped, gloves on, wire cutters in hand. The still frame of her being jolted backward, mouth wide open, became an instant favorite in the sheriff's inbox. He didn't laugh, not out loud, but the twitch in his cheek betrayed him. "Ma'am," he said flatly, "you walked onto private property, disabled a clearly marked fence, and attempted to plug into someone's power after being told not to multiple times. This is you, right?" Karen cleared her throat. "I was investigating a code violation. As president of the HOA, I have the right to inspect potential hazards. This isn't an HOA matter anymore. It's theft, tampering, trespassing, and possibly fraud." Karen's fingers curled around the edge of the chair, "But he zapped me. He submitted all his permits. Fence is legal. Voltage is within safety limits. And you, Karen, you might have just lit the match under your own feet." Back at the lake, Jake stayed quiet. He didn't celebrate. He split logs, cleaned the solar panels, checked his cameras. He'd dealt with enough people like Karen to know this wasn't the final blow, just another turn in the fight. Then came the white van. It pulled into Karen's driveway just before noon 2 days later. A man in a neon vest stepped out, utility company logo shining under the sun. He looked around, clipboard in hand, then knocked on her door. Karen didn't answer. She peeked through the blinds. Neighbors saw her, but she didn't step outside. Another worker joined the first. They walked the perimeter of her property, stopped near the edge that bordered Jake's cabin, then started scanning the ground with handheld detectors. Within minutes they found it, a buried line crossing into Jake's lot, branching off from his main junction box. It was spliced, routed through a PVC sleeve, and hidden under brush. Sloppy work meant to be temporary, but it had likely been leaching power for months. Jake was invited to watch. He didn't say a word. The technician explained how someone had tapped into the conduit illegally, pulling current directly from his system and bypassing the smart meter. A second technician took photos. Another flagged the area for trench repair. Karen finally came outside, then voice high-pitched, asking if there was a misunderstanding. The technician didn't answer. He held up a piece of split cable for her to see. "This didn't install itself, ma'am." The neighbors gathered slowly. Cindy from down the road, the Miller twins on their bikes, even old Mr. Riley, who rarely left his porch, stood up with binoculars in hand. They all saw it. Karen had been stealing power from Jake, not just a golf cart, charge here or there, a direct line, enough to knock his solar batteries out of sync on cloudy days, enough to cause the power trips, enough to file criminal charges. She said nothing else, just turned and walked back into her house, pulling the door shut harder than necessary. The next day, Jake received a formal apology letter from the utility company and confirmation that a claim had been opened. They'd be pursuing reimbursement on his behalf. He wouldn't have to lift a finger. Karen, meanwhile, was facing a civil suit and a county inspection. Her voice, once constant around the neighborhood, had vanished. But Jake still wasn't done, because, while Karen had buried a cable, she'd also buried something else. A lie bigger than power theft. And in just a few days, Jake would uncover it when he least expected to, and everything she'd built would crack from underneath. 3 days had passed since the utility company flagged Karen's illegal tap, but Jake still couldn't shake the feeling that something didn't add up. The buried line explained the outages, sure, but there were gaps. He'd seen odd readings even when he wasn't at the cabin. Days when Karen hadn't been around, at least not visibly. Jake sat on his porch with Rick, looking over the power logs. He sipped cold coffee, narrowed his eyes at the tablet screen, and then froze. "Rick, look at this." Rick leaned in, squinting. "That's a pull from your junction box at 4:13 a.m. That normal?" Jake shook his head. "That's the third one this week. Same time, give or take. And look at this spike. It's not just one outlet. It's a surge." Rick raised a brow. "Someone's drawing enough to light a full house." At 4 in the morning, Jake nodded. "She's still getting power, just not from the outlet or the buried line." They were quiet a moment, then Jake stood up. "We missed something." That afternoon, they started tracing every line from the main system. Jake had outfitted the cabin with solar and backup storage, but he hadn't installed it himself. He'd trusted a contractor, and it wasn't long before Rick spotted a flaw. "Your backup inverter is tied to a distribution panel outside your lot." Jake blinked. "That's impossible." Rick looked back at him. "Not if someone rerouted it without telling you." They followed the cable path with a handheld reader and found an unmarked junction box, hidden behind a row of decorative rocks on the far edge of the property. From there, a thick black conduit crossed beneath the fence line. Bending toward Karen's garage, Jake crouched beside it and pulled back the gravel. A second box identical to his own was buried halfway into the ground. "Freshly covered? Looks like someone tapped the backup battery line, not just your main grid," Rick said quietly. "She's been running your stored power too." Jake stood slowly. So she wasn't just stealing power. She was offloading her own bills onto mine completely. That night, Jake opened the app tied to his solar system's software. He set up a silent monitor, a diagnostic command that would alert him anytime the backup system fed power. He didn't have to wait long. At 4:16 a.m., his phone buzzed. Power was flowing somewhere. He opened the live feed. Karen's garage light was on, refrigerator, HUMMED. And something even more surprising, a set of grow lights in her basement window flickered into life. Jake zoomed in. Behind the glass, faint green leaves swayed under artificial light. He blinked. Rick, watching over his shoulder, muttered, "Is that what I think it is?" Karen wasn't just stealing power. She was growing something. A lot of it. Jake didn't jump to conclusions, but the signs were there. Heat lamps, high wattage, a need for secrecy, her strange behavior, the fact that she'd gone to such lengths to keep her energy costs invisible. And if that was the case, the story wasn't just about HOA abuse. Anymore, it was about criminal intent. Jake backed up the video, saved screenshots. He called Sheriff Donnelly and asked for a discreet visit. By the time the sun rose, a warrant request had already been drafted. Karen never saw it coming. The knock on her door came at 10:12 a.m. 4 uniformed officers, one search team. By 10:35, they'd opened the garage. By 10:42, they were rolling out equipment. By 10:50, Karen was sitting on her own porch in tears, muttering to herself, hair frazzled, sunglasses hiding her face. Neighbors watched from porches and driveways. No one said a word. They didn't have to. The truth had finally come to light. And Jake? He simply sat on his porch, phone in hand, scrolling through messages. His favorite one was from the sheriff himself. "You were right. And she just made it a whole lot worse." But Jake still had one final move left to make, because there was one place Karen hadn't dared to trespass yet, and it would be the one thing that turned the whole community against her forever. For a week, the neighborhood lived in a strange quiet. Karen's once proud home now looked like a fortress, and retreat shutters closed. Driveway empty, her golf cart nowhere to be seen. The grow light scandal hadn't made the papers yet, but in a tight-knit lake community, news didn't need ink to spread. The sheriff's office had cleared out whatever she was cultivating, and the investigation was ongoing. No charges yet, but the whispers were loud enough to echo across the water. Jake kept his focus forward. He wasn't interested in destroying her, just restoring peace. Still, he knew one truth. Karen wouldn't go quietly, not unless she was voted out. That chance came sooner than expected. The HOA posted notice for an emergency board election, citing unresolved leadership conflict and community trust issues. Translation: the board was tired of cleaning up after Karen's messes. And when Gail Matson, the vice president, approached Jake that afternoon with a clipboard of her own, she asked just one question: "Will you run?" Jake didn't answer right away. He sat on it, talked to Rick, thought about the months of nonsense, the false rules, the buried power line, the electric fence incident, the fact that his peaceful lake retreat had been turned into a psychological obstacle course, just because someone with a clipboard couldn't stay in her lane. Eventually, he said yes. Election day came fast. The HOA held it under the clubhouse pavilion, a charming space meant for summer picnics, not mutinies. But the mood was electric. Neighbors showed up in flannel and flip-flops, bringing folding chairs, cookies, and even lawn games, because while it was an election, everyone knew it was really a public trial. Karen arrived late, her head held high, acting as if nothing had changed. But her clipboard was missing, and her usual entourage had dwindled. Even Cindy, once her ally, now stood behind the lemonade table with arms crossed. Each candidate was allowed 2 minutes to speak. Karen stood first, voice trembling with forced confidence. She blamed misunderstandings, claimed Jake had exaggerated tensions, and referred to her electrical trespassing as an honest attempt at neighborhood sharing. No one clapped. Then Jake stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even hold a note card. He simply spoke from the gut. I moved here for peace, not for drama. I respected my neighbors, followed the rules, and asked for nothing. But some people think a title gives them the right to take what isn't theirs. I didn't ask for this fight. I only responded. And if I'm elected, I won't lead with fines or threats. I'll lead with boundaries. Real ones. Silence. Then someone clapped. Then another. Then half the pavilion. By the time votes were cast, the result was clear before the counting even finished. Jake won by a landslide. Karen stood near the snack table, sunglasses on, lips tight, arms crossed. She didn't contest. She didn't congratulate. She simply turned and walked away, her shoulders smaller than anyone had seen them. But Jake wasn't finished. His first act as HOA president, he called a special meeting public, recorded and attended by nearly every homeowner. During the meeting, he proposed 3 things. A full review of HOA spending under Karen's presidency, a repeal of unwritten HOA codes Karen had fabricated, and the permanent removal of Karen Middleton from any future HOA leadership role. All 3 passed unanimously, and then came the twist. Jake stepped up to the final item on the agenda, naming the community's next share-due structure. He held up a photograph, a freeze frame of Karen being zapped mid-air by the electric fence, her hair haloed in static. Then he revealed a small bronze plaque. It read, Middleton Memorial Power Station. Let this be a shocking reminder to always ask first. Laughter echoed through the pavilion. The board approved the plaque with a wink and a handshake. Karen never returned to another HOA meeting again. By fall, her property was listed for sale. Jake meanwhile restored his cabin, expanded the dock, and added motion-triggered string lights along the shoreline. He finally got the peace he came for, not because he fought fire with fire, but because he fought ego with evidence. And outlasted the current. The fence stayed up, but cameras stayed running. And Jake? He sat every evening by the lake, feet up, drink in hand, watching the sunset reflect across the still water, finally uninterrupted.